What's up, everybody? This is Matt Miller, and today I have a very special episode. It is the very first episode of my podcast, The Visionary Leaders Roadmap. And the reason for this podcast is I believe that the world truly needs more leaders and more visionaries. And when you have somebody that's able to lead and mentor a crowd of people in a certain direction to achieve a certain goal, that's where I believe there's going to be the most accomplished people and the people that are able to make the biggest difference in other people's lives. So the motivation and inspiration behind this podcast is I've always been somebody who's super curious on how certain individuals achieve greatness, on how certain people start from the very bottom and they grow a name and they grow up the ranks and reach a certain level where they have a mass audience and maybe they're speaking on stage and they have a platform and they have a personal brand where they're attracting so many people and they have such a big impact on other people. You think of some of the big podcasters today or some of the New York Times best-selling authors. My curiosity is, how did these people get to where they're at, and where did they start from, and how did they accomplish what they did? And I've always been super passionate about following other people's journey and trying to take what I can and learn from their successes so that I can apply it to my own life. And during this podcast, I'm going to be sharing my message and sharing what I learned from other people in order to reach that level of greatness. So that, hopefully by sharing my message and sharing what I'm learning, I'm able to inspire and instruct other people to achieve greatness themselves. And I think about the very first podcast episode that I listened to. I was in the car at the time. I think I was on lunch break at work, and it was probably like only a 30-minute, maybe an hour lunch break. And I remember I was in my car and I think I just finished up an audiobook. And I think at the time I ran out of credits, so I didn't have another way to listen to another audiobook. So I think I opened the podcast app, and at the time I was really interested in money. And I think the first thing I searched was finance. I think I searched that in the search bar. And the first thing that came up was the Personal Finance Podcast by Andrew Giancola. I remember that was the very first podcaster that came up. And the episode was FIRE. So Financial Independence, Retire Early. And I remember I listened to that episode, and I was just amazed on the amount of value that I got from a free 30-minute podcast. And I got pretty passionate about it that the next day when I came on lunch, I also pulled up the Personal Finance Podcast and listened to another episode. And then the next day I repeated that. And by the end of the week, I went from knowing very little about finance to feeling like I could at least teach a few main topics about saving, investing, and retirement accounts. And I repeated that process not only on my lunch breaks, but every time I went to the gym. Instead of working out and listening to music, instead I would listen to a podcast. And I became really fascinated with taking in information from the modality of audio. When I was younger, I never loved reading physical copies and paperback copies of books. And I never was able to comprehend as well as when I listen to something. So I'm definitely better at taking in information from an audio or from a video. And that's what really drew me to podcasts and watching videos and taking information in that way. So I ended up marathoning this podcast, probably like 100 or 200 episodes while I was at the gym and I was on lunch break. And I felt like I was at a point where after those 200 episodes, I felt like I knew the path to achieve financial independence, achieve financial abundance. And I just thought podcasts were so powerful. And what I did was, after I started listening to all the money and the finance, I got old of that subject and I felt like I learned a lot from that subject. And I moved on to, other things that would help me out, like listening to goal achieving podcasts or building habits or, other podcasts on just how to improve your life. So I started listening to these podcasts and reading different books on it. And this is what really planted the seed for me to really start what I'm doing right now in my first podcast episode. And then I eventually listened to the Summit of Greatness podcast with Lewis Howes. And he's a huge podcaster right now. And he's super good at interviewing other people and just asking such interesting and curious questions. And I started listening to this podcast and I got really into the way that he interviewed people. And he'd always interview, the greatest people, whether they were the most financially successful or the best in terms of fitness or achieving goals. And everything was just so fascinating to me. And I really liked the way that Lewis Howes interviewed certain guests. And I eventually went to his Summit of Greatness, which was his live event in Columbus, Ohio. So I went to that event and I remember sitting there, and it was my first live event that I went to with keynote speakers and networking opportunities. I remember certain people would go on stage, certain speakers, and I just remember the feeling I got when somebody went up there and they motivated you and they inspired you and they taught something that stuck with you. And I was just super fascinated on how they had the ability to impact other people and transform lives. And I'd say that was kind of one of the main factors that led me into creating this podcast, was because that live event and speaking on stage and having that audience, knowing that those people started somewhere and they started building an audience, maybe it was through a podcast or through a video, but everybody starts somewhere. And I wanted to start somewhere and share some information. So that was definitely one of the biggest things that got me to start this. Another thing was I started reading books on online marketing, and I started reading books from an author, Russell Brunson. And he has a trilogy. His first book was Dotcom Secrets, and then Traffic Secrets, and then Expert Secrets. And the Dotcom Secrets book, that's all about online marketing. And the Traffic Secrets book is how do you get people to buy what you're selling. Then the Expert Secrets book is all about sharing and storytelling and being able to build a personal brand. So all three of those books were super interesting, and it all was funneled around creating content. So I really liked that. And then he talked about something that stuck with me was, he said, if you publish every single day content for a year, you'll never have to worry about money again. And I don't have those goals to publish content every day. I don't have to, I don't have the goal to make this super financially successful. But just that stuck with me and gave me a little bit more inspiration to start this. In addition to that, he really talked about finding your voice and storytelling and all that stuff, which is going to help with presenting and just overall the importance of building a personal brand. And then along with Russell Brunson, I also read some books from Gary Vaynerchuk, and he talked about documenting and not creating. So when you're somebody that's sharing different content, his strategy was just document what you're doing throughout your day and don't worry about creating something new. And that also helped me decide to do this. So overall, there's three main mentors that I had. And the first one was Russell Brunson. The second one was Lewis Howes. And both of those guys have really well-selling books. they have podcasts, they have live events, they sell stuff, and that's all, really fascinating to me. And the third mentor that I haven't mentioned yet is Brendon Burchard. And he's also in the same space with online marketing and motivation and personal development. And he also has several really well-selling books, especially The Millionaire Messenger, which kind of shows how you can share your message and become a millionaire. And reading that book and listening to his motivation podcasts and his marketing podcasts, he was also a big source of inspiration for me to start this. So overall, like, who is this podcast for? It's for anyone who has, a goal to reach more people, to inspire and motivate other people, anybody who has a message to share, and those who want to grow along with me, from me sharing my message and them taking in information and then having us all grow together. And I kind of want to show how what I'm doing to strive to achieve greatness by walking the walk and just documenting and sharing what I'm doing on a daily and weekly basis. So I'm really excited about it. And my next episode will be in 1 week from today.